بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك وعلى المستشهدين بين يديك يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. لتعجيل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان ارفعوا أصواتكم بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. Continuing on from our discussion last night about the personality and the character and the life of Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam, the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi afdalu salatu wassalam, we will try to unpack some aspects of her life that could be relevant to us today and to the bringing up of our children, especially in societies that are facing increasing hardship. As we mentioned last night, and we will mention once again, the life of Sayyidah Zainab is one that if one was to analyze it from today's perspective, if one was to analyze her life psychologically from the modern day understanding of trauma, the modern day understanding of grief, of issues like PTSD, of issues like going through hardship and coming out as a result, somebody who is weak and frail and can fall short in many aspects of their life because of the excuse of having gone through these trials and tribulations, it would seem to us that Sayyidah Zainab should, at least theoretically, based on today's understanding, come out as such. And that's why when we find her coming out with stronger character and resilience, it only points towards her iman. But it also points towards something else that we could reflect on ourselves and in our attempts to raise our children in this day and age. The question: how could somebody lose their grandfather and then their mother within the space of 6 months, and then their father is not only killed during Salat, but throughout her life her father was being cursed on the pulpits of the masajid because of the Umayyads, and her family, specifically her father, but also her family, was subject to such a high level of hatred and smear campaign from the Umayyads that people were killed simply for loving her father. Imagine a young daughter growing up in this society and people are being killed simply by being associated with her father. Imagine the trauma that should create and the psychological adversity that this should create on a young person. And then, of course, the tragedy that accumulated in the 10th of Muharram, where her sons, her brothers, her nieces and nephews were either killed or taken as captive. That should be the peak of somebody just breaking down. But how does she not break? How does she remain a mountain of patience and resilience and strength? There is a psychological theory that talks about the circles of that the child is exposed to, the levels of the shells that the child experiences throughout their life. What do we mean? There is the innermost circle that the child is exposed to. That is the first point of contact throughout their the first 10-15 years of their life. That is obviously their homes, their immediate family members, And then after the ages of 5, it starts becoming their school and peers at school as well. That is the innermost circle. Then there is a middle circle, which is the second level of social contact that the child is exposed to. It could be school, it could be other social activities, extracurricular activities, other friends and family. And then, or for example, the mosque as well and the centers. And then there is the outermost circle, which isn't as much physical necessarily, but it is very much impacting the child as well. Media, social media, movies, society in general. These levels of exposure to a child as they grow up create a force of either adversity or a force of spiritual flourishment for the child. And the theory states that if you were to apply a focus on the innermost circle of the child's upbringing, such that you build a fortress, an immunity within their house, and their first direct points of contact and social contacts, then that would protect them from the dangers of the outer circles. The example is Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. Her innermost circle is the household of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi himself. As we said, it is the house of Manzil al-Wahi, it is the house of revelation. She was associated and she was centered around ma'soomeen and individuals whose presence was never seen before. Individuals that were purified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as per the Quran. And so that created a fortress for her. That created a fortress such that when she was in the courtyard of Yazid, she did not break. When her father was being attacked through the campaign of the Umayyads to the level where the Syrians did not even acknowledge his virtue whatsoever, and that his death or his martyrdom brought happiness to some so-called Muslims, she still did not break. She remained resilient. So from that archetype, from that figure in Islamic history, what are some lessons that we could take and apply to our life and the life of our young ones as we face the adversity, especially in non-Muslim lands? Firstly, as we said, let the home be built first before focusing on other matters. Many parents are concerned about the fact that schools are becoming all too liberal and the anti-Islamic values are increasing more and more. And whilst that is definitely a valid concern, the issue is many families are concerned about this more than the environment that they have at home. And many families have too many shortages at home and too much toxic habits at home and too much lack of religious education and upbringing and proper discipline at home. And despite all of this, their focus is what is the teacher teaching my child, and which friends is my child picking, and so on and so forth. As we said, these are all valid concerns, but your responsibility as a parent lies in what you control the most, and that is of course advice for myself before anybody. We can't, as much as we try to exert effort, we can't control the time spent the time our child spends with each and every friend of theirs. We can't control what is taught in different subjects at school. But what can be controlled is the inner home environment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is being able to teach our children the proper responses to different adversities and interrogations they could be challenged to. Unfortunately, the hatred and Islamophobia has reached a level where it's almost inevitable that a young Muslim brother, and specifically even more so a young Muslim sister, will either be bullied or interrogated at some point in their lives about their religion. We all saw the Ashura procession that took place yesterday. And if we were to open Facebook and see the comments by many adults, these are actual adults and not children, it would shock you. I mean, we know about the level of Islamophobia that exists in the West, but one comment particularly has thousands of likes. One person commented on that video showing the Muslims or the Shia Muslims protesting in the city or attending this procession. It's not even a protest, it's just a procession. It's a peaceful gathering. But one person was commenting that I never wished to be a bus driver more than this time in my life. You know what he's alluding to? Open hatred and inciting for violence. And if that was to be a Muslim, they would have been arrested by now, without a doubt. So if our children are going to face these situations where there's going to be immediate prejudice against the young daughter simply for wearing the hijab, and assumptions of associations with criminal activity and terrorism and whatever they perceive of Islam, our duty as either parents or older brothers and sisters is to educate them on the appropriate response to that situation, just like we would educate them about how to react in a medical emergency. That's how important it is. That's the priority that we need to give to our children on responding to moments of adversity and hardship and bullying and interrogation, such that we create a sense of identity in them that they shouldn't shy away from being Muslim. Unfortunately, a lot of times, and we've all faced this before growing up in this country, we tend to go towards the apologetic response. I mean, a Shia could, for example, face some questions next week about the procession in the city, and it is not a surprise for one of our children to say, for example, oh, these are extremists, I have nothing to do with them, they're a minority. It's not a surprise. It could happen. And then that compromise turns into other compromises, where they're not only verbally disassociating from their own people, but they also start to practice their own religion less and less. And that's all because we don't create in them an inner fortress and the ability to respond to this adversity and interrogation. So that's the second point. The third point, and a lot of people fall victim to this unfortunately, is many people try to protect their children by isolating them. They think that protection and isolation are the same thing, whereas in fact they're very different. When you create an isolated environment for our child, we're only delaying what's inevitable. We could protect them from some things for the first 10 years, for the first 15 years, but firstly it's going to weaken their confidence. They're not going to have a sense of identity in a young person that represents their own faith and their own beliefs and their own practices. And thirdly, eventually they're going to be let go. We're not going to have a control over our child forever. They're going to have their own autonomy, they're going to be adults, they're going to have their own decision making about their career, about their marriage and life and so on and so forth. So if they are just isolated for 15, 20 years, what's going to happen after they're married or after they go into the career or so on and so forth? So many parents and people create this confusion between protection and isolation. And in fact, that shouldn't be the case. Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam, she was in the presence of some sermons of Amir al-Mu'mineen behind a barrier of modesty. She would be there with her father in some narrations. That shows you that when she was able to speak in Kufa and in Sham, she had a role model in her mind, and that is her father. And that brings us to our next point. Many times we create too many rules for children and not enough role models. We expect that our role as parents is to discipline and to educate by listing out the do's and don'ts, the right and wrong, expecting that the child follows this blindly. And the moment they don't, we just punish them. And we think that we've done what we have to do, they are responsible. In fact, it is even proven psychologically that the child is more likely to emulate and follow a rule once they have an example of that ruling in their lives. So if a child faces a moment of adversity, or they are interrogated by a question, it is better for them to remember Sayyidah Zainab as a role model and think to themselves, how would she respond in that situation as they navigate these challenges, more than them trying to remember what their parents told them about responding. Because that's just theory, and theory is forgotten and sometimes difficult to practice. But when someone is emotionally connected to role models through these majalis, through the azar, through these commemorations and gatherings, they build that emotional bridge with these personalities, such that subconsciously they will try to emulate their behavior and their reactions to different circumstances. So building role models instead of just rules. And finally, being role models ourselves for them. We can't expect children to follow what we say, but we definitely must expect children to follow how we act. If our actions as parents, as older brothers, as older friends and sisters, if our actions are very different to our instructions, we shouldn't expect our children to follow our instructions and ignore our actions. A child sees their parents almost in a godly way, especially at the very early ages. Some studies have proven that they almost perceive their father to be almost like an ilah wal-iyadhu billah. But obviously they don't have the full mental cognition to understand the concept of a creator to its real value, so they divert that inner attention towards their parents. So when their parents act in certain ways, the child will inevitably follow. So these are all 5 ways that we can attempt to build an inner fortress within our child, inspired by the life of Sayyidah Zainab, which had the strongest environment that protected her from the outer adversities that she faced. And finally, last but definitely not least, is the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq, and the power of the unseen in providing us the foundations for bringing up our children and building ourselves to be appropriate mentors and educators for them. As it is commonly narrated, Imam Zayn al-Abidin says that on the night of the 11th, Sayyidah Zainab was performing Salatul Layl, even despite the fact that she had experienced what she had experienced. Many of us, brothers and sisters, we try to delay these acts of extra worship and mustahabbat to a stage in life where we assume we're going to be stronger or at least have more time. In reality, your youth is your prime time to perform Salatul Layl, to accumulate these extra deeds, not only purely for accumulation of deeds, but also to develop the right habits. You're not going to be expected to pray Salatul Layl consistently when you're 40 and 50 and thinking about death a little bit more, if in your 20s and 30s you only pray it during Laylatul Qadr throughout the entire year, and then forget about it for the rest of the year. Our leaders and our scholars have always emphasized on us taking advantage of our youth more than anything and everything. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيد الخلق أجمعين محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.